No invitation for the black kid. What the teacher did next left everyone speechless. Imagine being a child, full of hope and innocence, looking forward to a simple joy that every kid treasures, a birthday party. But then, imagine the heartbreak when you realize you're the only one in your class not invited. For Levi, a young black boy with a heart of gold, this wasn't just an ordinary snub. It was a painful reminder of the struggles he already faced as a child of color in a world that often overlooked him. But what happened next will leave you speechless. This story isn't just about exclusion. It's about courage, redemption, and the power of love to break down barriers. As you listen, think about the times in your own life when you felt unseen or excluded. Maybe you've been that child, or maybe you've been someone who didn't realize the hurt your actions could cause. Today, we're building a community of understanding, a space where stories like Levi's remind us of the work we still need to do to create a world where every child is valued. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe and join our family. Together, we can make a difference. It was a typical Monday morning, and the sun was shining brightly through the windows of the classroom. Levi sat at his desk, carefully drawing on the corner of his notebook while his teacher explained the day's math lesson. Around him, his classmates buzzed with excitement, their energy impossible to contain. Something was different about today, though Levi couldn't quite put his finger on it. The room seemed alive with a shared anticipation, but he wasn't sure why. The mystery didn't last long. Toward the end of the lesson, Emily, one of the more popular kids in class, stood up and handed a small stack of brightly colored envelopes to the teacher. She whispered something in her ear, and the teacher nodded before calling out, "Emily would like to pass out some invitations." Levi watched as Emily moved confidently between the rows of desks, handing out cards with a big smile. Each time someone received one, their face lit up with excitement. The conversations started immediately. Plans about what they'd wear, who they'd sit with, and what presents they might bring. Levi's heart raced as Emily got closer to his desk. He looked up at her with a small, hopeful smile. But Emily didn't stop. She moved past Levi as if he wasn't there, placing the last invitation on the desk behind him. Levi's smile faltered. He looked down quickly, pretending not to care, but inside he felt a wave of hurt and confusion. He tried to focus on the numbers on his page, but they blurred as his mind raced with questions. Why wasn't he invited? Had he done something wrong? Did Emily just forget? The truth hit him harder than he expected. Levi wasn't sure why he felt so certain, but deep down, he knew. He hadn't been left out by accident. This wasn't the first time he'd felt invisible, like he didn't quite belong. Growing up as one of the only black kids in his class, Levi had learned to notice the subtle ways people treated him differently. A joke that went too far. A seat that suddenly wasn't available. A group project where his ideas were dismissed. They weren't always big moments, but each one added to the quiet ache he carried with him every day. When the bell rang for recess, Levi hung back, taking longer than usual to gather his things. He didn't want to face the playground, where he knew the other kids would be talking about the party. Instead, he sat quietly in his seat, drawing in the margins of his notebook, pretending not to hear as his classmates chatted about the weekend's big event. At home that evening, Levi's mum, Maria, immediately noticed something was off. Levi wasn't his usual cheerful self. He didn't tell her about the joke someone made in class or share a funny story about the teacher. Things he usually couldn't wait to tell her. Instead, he quietly picked at his dinner barely touching the food on his plate. "Levi, honey, what's wrong?" Maria asked, her voice gentle but concerned. Levi hesitated, then mumbled, "Everyone in class is going to Emily's birthday party. Everyone except me." Maria's heart sank. She put her fork down and reached across the table to take his hand. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Did Emily say why you weren't invited?" Levi shrugged, his eyes downcast. "No, she just didn't give me one." Maria felt a pang of anger, not at Emily, but at the world that had taught her son this kind of pain so early in life. She had hoped Levi wouldn't have to face what she and so many others had endured, being excluded, overlooked, or judged because of the color of their skin. But she also knew that this was, sadly, part of the reality they lived in. Over decades, each black person experiences moments like this at least once, moments that leave a lasting mark on the heart. Maria pulled Levi into a hug, holding him tightly as she whispered, "You are so special, Levi. You are made in God's image, and He sees you even when others don't. You're not invisible to Him." Levi nodded against her shoulder, but the hurt in his chest didn't disappear. Maria prayed silently as she held him, asking for wisdom, for strength, and for a way to help her son see the beauty and worth she saw in him every day. She didn't have all the answers, but she trusted that God did. And in that moment, she made a promise to herself. She would not let this moment define Levi. She would find a way to show him that his value wasn't determined by a party invitation, or the lack of one. The next day at school, Levi kept his head down, trying to blend into the background. He didn't want to give anyone a reason to notice him or ask questions. As much as he told himself he didn't care about the party. The truth was, it lingered in his mind like a dull ache. Every time he overheard a snippet of conversation about it, what games they'd play, what kind of cake there'd be, it felt like another reminder that he wasn't part of it. He started to feel smaller, as if the world around him were closing in. At lunchtime, Levi sat alone at the edge of the cafeteria, picking at his sandwich. Normally, he'd join a group of kids who played card games or traded snacks. But today, the thought of trying to join in felt exhausting. He couldn't shake the idea that he didn't belong, that no matter what he did, he'd always be the kid who was left out. As he sat there, Levi's teacher, Mrs. Parker, walked by and paused. Mrs. Parker was known for her no-nonsense attitude and her deep care for her students. She had a way of noticing when something was off, and today, Levi's quiet demeanor didn't escape her attention. "Hey, Levi," she said, sitting down across from him. "You doing okay? You've been awfully quiet today." Levi shrugged, trying to brush her off. "I'm fine." But Mrs. Parker wasn't convinced. She leaned in, her voice gentle. "You know, sometimes it helps to talk about what's bothering you. I'm here if you want to share." Levi hesitated, then sighed. "It's just, everyone in class is going to Emily's party, and I wasn't invited." Mrs. Parker's face softened with understanding. She nodded slowly, as if piecing things together. "I'm so sorry to hear that, Levi. That must feel really unfair." Levi nodded, the lump in his throat making it hard to speak. Mrs. Parker let the silence linger for a moment before continuing. "Levi, can I tell you something? Sometimes when people leave others out, it's not about the person who's excluded. It's about their own fears, their own insecurities. It doesn't make it right, but it also doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you." Levi looked up at her, surprised. "But why me?" he asked. Why does it always feel like I'm the one left out? Mrs. Parker took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. Levi, the world can be a hard place, especially for someone like you. Sometimes people judge others because of things they don't understand. It's not fair and it's not right, but it happens. What I want you to remember is that their actions don't define you. You're smart, kind, and so much more than what anyone else sees on the surface. Levi nodded slowly, her words sinking in. It didn't make the hurt go away, but it was a small comfort to know that someone understood. As the week went on, Levi tried to push thoughts of the party out of his mind, but they kept creeping back in. Each day, his classmates grew more excited, sharing details about the event. The more they talked, the more Levi felt like an outsider. He wasn't just excluded from a party, he was excluded from the conversations, the laughter, the sense of belonging that came with it. On Friday, the day before the party, Mrs. Parker stood at the front of the class, a serious expression on her face. Before we start our lesson, I want to take a moment to talk about something important, she said. The class quieted down, sensing the gravity in her tone. Every one of you in this room is special, Mrs. Parker began. You all have something unique to offer the world. But sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we treat others in ways that make them feel small or unseen. That's not the kind of classroom or the kind of world I want us to have. Levi's heart raced as Mrs. Parker continued. He wasn't sure if she was talking about him or if anyone else had noticed, but her words struck a chord. I want you to think about the choices you make, Mrs. Parker said. Are you including others? Are you showing kindness? Are you treating people the way you'd want to be treated? Those small choices matter more than you know. The room was silent, her words hanging in the air. Levi glanced around and saw a few of his classmates shifting uncomfortably in their seats. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Not because the party didn't hurt anymore, but because someone was standing up for the idea that things could be different. That afternoon, as the bell rang and the students filed out of the classroom, Mrs. Parker stopped Levi at the door. Levi, she said, her voice low, don't forget what I said. You are so much more than how others treat you. And remember, God sees the heart. He sees yours and it's beautiful. Levi nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest that hadn't been there before. It wasn't a solution, but it was a reminder that he wasn't alone, and that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Over the weekend, the weight of the party lingered in Levi's mind, even as he tried to distract himself with his favorite books and video games. Every now and then, he caught himself imagining what his classmates were doing, laughing, playing, and sharing stories that he'd never be a part of. It wasn't just the party itself that hurt. It was the feeling of being left out, as though he were invisible, unworthy of the connection everyone else seemed to share so easily. On Sunday afternoon, Levi sat quietly on the porch with his grandfather, a man who carried the stories of their family like treasures. Grandpa Henry had a calm presence that could make the world feel steady, even when everything seemed uncertain. He noticed Levi's quiet demeanor and gently asked, "What's on your mind, son? You've been awfully quiet." Levi hesitated, unsure if he wanted to share. But something about his grandfather's kind eyes made him feel safe. "It's nothing," Levi began. But Grandpa Henry raised an eyebrow, the kind that said, "I know better." Levi sighed and explained everything, the party, the lack of an invitation, the way it made him feel like he didn't belong. He didn't hold back, letting the pain and frustration pour out as his grandfather listened, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. When Levi finished, Grandpa Henry sat back in his chair, his face thoughtful. "Levi," he began, his voice steady, "I want you to remember something. This world hasn't always been kind to people like us. My father, your great-grandfather, faced doors that were slammed shut just because of the color of his skin. He wasn't invited to places where others were welcome. He wasn't given the same opportunities. And you know what he told me?" Levi shook his head, leaning forward, eager to hear the story. "He told me, 'Son, you can't let the world's rejection define you. You come from a line of people who stood tall even when the world tried to push them down. You carry their strength, their courage, and their love. No one can take that away from you.'" Levi felt a lump rise in his throat. He had heard bits and pieces about his ancestors before, but hearing it now, in this context, gave it a weight he hadn't fully grasped. "But it still hurts, Grandpa," he said softly. "Why does it have to be this way?" Grandpa Henry reached over and placed a hand on Levi's shoulder. "It hurts because it's wrong, and it shouldn't happen. But Levi, the way you respond to that hurt is what matters. Do you let it make you bitter, or do you let it make you stronger? Do you let it harden your heart, or do you let it open your eyes to the kind of world you want to help create?" Levi nodded, his grandfather's words sinking in. "You're not just carrying your own story, Levi. You're carrying the hopes and prayers of those who came before you. Every step you take, every time you choose kindness over anger, every time you stand up for what's right, you honor them." That night, Levi lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as his grandfather's words echoed in his mind. He thought about the strength of his ancestors, the sacrifices they had made, and the way they had kept moving forward, even in the face of rejection and injustice. He thought about the prayers his family had whispered over generations, asking God for guidance and strength. And he thought about what it meant to carry those prayers into the present. The next day, as Levi walked into school, he carried himself a little differently. He wasn't sure what had changed, but he felt a quiet resolve, as if the weight of his ancestors' strength was now resting on his shoulders, lifting him up instead of holding him down. He couldn't control how others treated him, but he could control how he responded. And today, he chose to walk with pride. When he entered the classroom, Mrs. Parker greeted him with a warm smile. "Good morning, Levi," she said, her tone filled with encouragement. Levi smiled back, grateful for her presence. But as he took his seat, he noticed something unusual. The room felt different, quieter, as though the students were holding back something. He caught a few glances from his classmates, and for a moment, he wondered if he had done something wrong. At lunchtime, as he sat at his usual spot in the corner of the cafeteria, a group of his classmates approached him. Emily, the girl whose party he hadn't been invited to, stood at the front of the group, looking nervous. "Levi," she began, her voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" Levi blinked, caught off guard. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he nodded. Emily sat down across from him, and the others followed, forming a small circle. I wanted to say I'm sorry," Emily continued. "I didn't invite you to my party, and that wasn't right. I've been thinking about what Mrs. Parker said, and I realized I made a mistake." Levi felt his heart race, a mix of emotions flooding him at once: relief, surprise, and a lingering hurt. He looked at Emily, searching for sincerity in her eyes, and found it. "Why didn't you invite me?" he asked softly, the question he had been carrying for days. Emily looked down, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I don't know," she admitted. "I guess I just didn't think about it. But that's not an excuse. I didn't think about how it would feel for you. And that's not okay." One of the boys in the group, Marcus, chimed in. "We all realized we've been kind of unfair, Levi. It's not just about the party. It's about how we've treated you, and we want to make it right." Levi stared at them, unsure of what to say. The words felt genuine, but they also felt heavy, as if they carried the weight of a history much larger than this single moment. He thought about his grandfather's words, about the strength of his ancestors and the importance of forgiveness. He thought about the prayers that had carried his family through generations of struggle and resilience. Finally, he nodded. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means a lot." As the group began to talk, Levi felt a small crack in the wall that had surrounded him, a glimmer of connection that he hadn't felt in a long time. It didn't erase the hurt, but it was a step toward something better, something brighter. And in that moment, he realized that the strength he carried wasn't just for enduring. It was for building bridges, for choosing love, and for honoring the legacy of those who had walked this path before him. The days that followed brought a wave of change that Levi hadn't expected. His classmates, inspired by the conversation in the cafeteria, began to approach him more often, not with pity, but with genuine curiosity and warmth. They started asking him questions, not just about schoolwork or hobbies, but about his life, his experiences, and his thoughts. It was the kind of connection he had longed for, but never thought he'd find among them. Mrs. Parker, too, noticed the shift. During class, she made an effort to include moments where students could share their stories and experiences, weaving lessons about empathy and understanding into the curriculum. She spoke openly about the importance of seeing one another as individuals, about breaking the silent barriers that divide people based on assumptions or prejudice. "We're more alike than we realize," she told them one afternoon. "And when we take the time to understand each other, those walls come down." Levi felt a warmth he hadn't known before. The once lonely corners of his days began to fill with small but meaningful interactions. A smile in the hallway, an invitation to join a group project, a genuine laugh shared with a classmate. These weren't grand gestures, but they were steps in a direction Levi had almost stopped hoping for. At home, Levi shared these changes with his grandfather, whose face lit up with pride. "That's the way, son," Grandpa Henry said, patting Levi's shoulder. "Sometimes it only takes one spark to light a fire. And don't forget, you're part of something much bigger. You've got ancestors cheering you on every step of the way." Levi smiled, feeling the weight of those words settle in his heart. It was true. His journey wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had come before him, who had faced struggles he couldn't even imagine, and who had paved the way so that he could walk with his head held high. And it was about everyone who would come after him, the generations yet to face their own battles. He realized then that every step forward, no matter how small, was a step toward honoring their legacy. One afternoon, Mrs. Parker invited Levi to share something personal with the class during a lesson about community and kindness. At first, he hesitated. The idea of standing in front of his peers and speaking about something so close to his heart felt overwhelming. But as he looked at Mrs. Parker's encouraging smile and thought about his grandfather's words, he realized this was another step he needed to take. Standing at the front of the classroom, Levi took a deep breath. "I used to feel invisible," he began. The room grew silent, his classmates leaning in to listen. "I thought I didn't matter because I was different. But my grandpa told me something I'll never forget. He said, "I carry the strength of my ancestors, and that I have the power to make a difference, not just for myself, but for others too." He paused, looking around the room. Each of us has the power to make someone feel seen, to make them feel like they belong. It doesn't take much: a kind word, a smile, an invitation. Those small things can change everything. As Levi finished, the room erupted into applause. Mrs. Parker wiped a tear from her eye, and several students approached Levi afterward to thank him for his words. It was a moment Levi would carry with him forever, a moment that reminded him of the power of vulnerability, of sharing his story, and of standing in his truth. In the weeks that followed, the classroom began to feel more like a community. Students who had rarely interacted before started finding common ground. They worked together on projects, laughed together during breaks, and stood up for one another in ways that hadn't happened before. Levi wasn't just included, he was valued, and that made all the difference. At home, Levi shared these moments with his family, who celebrated each victory with him. His grandfather often quoted Psalm 133:1, "How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity." Those words felt like a promise, a vision of what was possible when people chose understanding over division, kindness over judgment, love over hate. But Levi also knew the fight wasn't over. He could see it in the world beyond his school, the news stories that showed injustice, the subtle slights and assumptions he still faced in public spaces. Racism hadn't disappeared, and it wouldn't vanish overnight. But Levi also knew that change started with small steps, with the courage to stand up and speak out, with the willingness to see one another as equals. To everyone watching this story, I want to ask you, what step can you take today to bring more kindness and understanding into the world? Maybe it's reaching out to someone who feels left out. Maybe it's standing up against injustice when you see it. Maybe it's having a difficult conversation about prejudice with someone you care about. Each of us has the power to make a difference, no matter how small it might seem. And I want you to remember something Levi's grandfather said. You carry the strength of those who came before you. You carry their resilience, their courage, and their prayers. Every act of love and kindness you choose is a way of honoring them and building a better world for those who will come after you. If this story has touched your heart, if it's made you think about how you can be a light in someone else's life, I want to invite you to join this community. Click that subscribe button, leave a comment below, and share your own story. Let's create a space where we can uplift one another, share our experiences, and work together to break the chains of racism and division. Psalm 91:4 says, "He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge." Let's be that refuge for one another. Let's be the hands and feet of love and compassion in a world that so desperately needs it. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can create a world where everyone feels seen, valued, and loved. So tell me, what's your first step? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and let's walk this journey together. Because when we stand united, there's no darkness we can't overcome.